Oh, you beautiful messes. You heard that song? There's actually a song called Beautiful Messes. You feel like that today? I walked in and Graham told me I looked like a pirate. So I'm your first beautiful mess. True confession. I've never been a cat person. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. When I was young, let's just say our family went through a lot of cats. I grew up in Michigan where winters are long and cold, and guess where cats like to go? Up under the wheel well to stay warm. Well, that never ended well for the cats in our family. There were other ways cats represented death to me. They used to bring in dead birds and mice. Usually they were dead. That was horrifying for a young child to witness. I mean, after all, it wasn't like I grew up on a farm and was regularly witnessing the circle of life. Even as an adult, when I was staying with some friends in California who had a cat, a very antisocial cat, he never showed up. You know how that is. People will say they've got cats, right? Do you see him? Right. That's my point. Cat did not show up until 2 in the morning when he jumped on my head in the middle of the night. Wow, welcome. Now, don't misunderstand. I love animals. I even rescued a bunch of kittens that someone dumped on the side of the road once. Ed was fortunately out of town on that day because he's allergic to cats. That's why I say that. I'm just telling you, the cats have never made me feel comfortable. Batman, all right? Batman never had to fight off the evil dog woman. It was Catwoman who was perfectly terrifying. Earlier this week, I'm driving home and I see this beautiful, ultra fluffy, black designer type cat running through the neighbor's lawn. She looked like she was either running from something or to something, and I thought, boy, she's so vulnerable out there. You know, she's on her own. It's a scary world. There are predators like dogs. Dogs will chase cats, and raccoons will take on a cat, groundhogs, skunks, even rats and squirrels. And it hit me that cats in general just don't feel safe to me. Somehow dogs make me feel safe. Cats, less safe. They're unpredictable. You never know where they are, right? They're not sure they like you or need you. Dogs will bark at weird noises in the night because they want to protect you from the evil that's out there. Dogs are always happy to see you. They comfort you. They're loyal. They're loving. I want you to indulge me for a minute and 30 seconds, okay? I want to show you a video, and this will prove my point. All right, go ahead. See what I'm saying? They don't even trust their own. This morning we're going to talk about being safe. Where do you feel safe? At home? I guess it depends on the circumstances there, right? In certain neighborhoods? With certain people? When I was little, if I got scared at night, I would pull the covers over my head because everybody knows if you can't see the monster, they can't see. Right. I also believed all those years ago that if I was with my parents, nothing bad could ever happen to me. I would get nervous whenever they went away. Now, that feeling of safety can change for a child if they lose a parent. Sometimes if a parent gets divorced, even if parents are struggling with their own demons or are indifferent to them. Have you watched some of the footage of Mary Tyler Moore's life and people being interviewed this week? In just about all of them, they talked about her dad's indifference. She said she only ever got one compliment from him her whole life that she can remember. She was 16 in her prom dress, and her dad told her she looked handsome. Her mother was an alcoholic. In fact, Mary said she got married very young, not because she really thought it was the right thing to do, but because she wanted to get out of her house. It was not a refuge. Have you ever been at a place where you once felt safe, but something changed? And that place or that person no longer feels safe to you? And why do we care so much about being safe anyway? I've been thinking a lot about safety this week because I was reading Psalm 15, which asks the question, who shall abide in God's sanctuary? The only true safe place that there really is. Let's take a minute. I know Aaron read it, but I don't think you can read the living word of God enough, so let's read it. Why don't we read together? Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? Who may live on your holy mountain? The one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from their heart, whose tongue utters no slander, who does no wrong to a neighbor and casts no slur on others, who despises a vile person but honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps an oath even when it hurts and does not change their mind, who lends money to the poor without interest, who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Whoever does these things will never be shaken. Let's just pray a minute. Father, whatever we have to lay down at your feet this morning, help us to do that. Whatever we need to confess, whatever we need to turn over to you. Maybe it's a burden we're carrying or something we're worrying about today. Help us to, in this moment, just release it to you. You, our sanctuary. In Jesus' name, amen. So maybe the question David asks in this psalm is one we all ask from time to time: am I worthy to be in the presence of God? At the time of this psalm, entrance into the sanctuary, into the temple in Jerusalem, involved a liturgical act. So people would come into the worship area of the temple, standing in the entrance, and basically would ask God, who's worthy to enter? And then the priest would respond and give you the conditions of your entry, and then you could come in. In Egypt, there's an inscription at one sanctuary. It says, who enters here should be clean, and he should cleanse himself the way he cleanses himself for the temple of the great God. And then there would be an oath you would say to get in. So you would say, I have not sinned against human beings. I have not made human beings miserable. I have not slaughtered God's cattle. I have not done evil things. There were things in an oath you had to say in order to get in. Can you imagine how many of us would be sitting here in this sanctuary this morning if we had to claim we had not made another human being miserable this week? Okay, I'm speaking for myself. Or sinned against them. We do it all the time, right? Let's talk about sanctuary for just a minute. The Latin, sanctorium, from sanctus, holy. In Isaiah 8:14, God is described as a sanctuary. He will be a holy place. And he refers to himself as such in Ezekiel 11:16, talking about Israel. He says, I have been a sanctuary for them. Sanctuary, it's where we are right now. A place set apart for worship, a place of refuge and rest, where you hopefully can feel peace. Sanctuary, the holiest part of a temple or church. In the Jewish temple, there was the Holy of Holies, only the priest could enter. Sanctuary, a church or other sacred place where a fugitive is immune from arrest or punishment. Sanctuary, where animals are sheltered and cannot be hunted, a place of protection, as in wildlife sanctuary. Sanctuary cities, we've heard a lot about that this week, haven't we? Cities who shelter illegal immigrants. There are over 200 in the United States today. Baltimore is not one of those cities. When Psalm 15 was written, you had to cleanse yourself from sin before you could enter into the sanctuary of the temple for worship, and that meant a blood sacrifice. But once Jesus came and died, he became our blood sacrifice. It says in Hebrews chapter 9 that he, Jesus, entered the Holy of Holies of the heavenly sanctuary for us when he sacrificed his own body as our high priest, granting us access to God. He is here with us. There's a lot to Psalm 15. It's more than just about this idea of communion with God. It talks about how we should live, and those are all important things. But this morning, I'm going to focus on sanctuary, which is about more than just our desire to feel safe. It's also a longing to be intimate, known, to worship the one who really knows us, who created us, and to be in that intimate place, which ultimately will be for eternity. Being safe, we talk about it as if it's something we can make happen in this world. And I think some of us have come to worship the idea of safety instead of worshiping the only one who can provide it, God, our refuge. We worship the idea of being safe because we're fearful. We fear being found out for who we really are. Sometimes we fear the truth. We fear losing a significant relationship, a job, sometimes our minds. Eminem has a song called Not Afraid, so at least there's one of us. In it, he talks about the black cloud that still keeps following him around, but he's gotten clean from his addictions. He talks about wanting to assume more of his parental responsibilities. He even apologizes for a bad album he released. I got to give you credit for that. Then there's the chorus, and he says, not afraid to take a stand, everybody come, take my hand. We'll walk this world together through the storm, whatever the weather, cold or warm, just letting you know you're not alone. First, let me just say, those are the only words in that song I could actually read in this sanctuary without offending anyone, in case you decide to look it up later. And I think it's a great sentiment that he wants to help others who may be going through tough times like he did. I think there's power in walking through this world with others, shared experience, right? It's why we talk about spiritual friendships here at churchONE a lot. But even though Eminem is a talented guy, he's a tough guy, grew up in a tough neighborhood, he probably isn't going to be the one who's going to get me through the storms of my life. This world is not a safe place. But that does not keep us from trying to make it so. And while there's nothing wrong with taking precautions to prevent tragedy or illness, it's also wise to acknowledge that this is a broken world. Because when we do acknowledge that, we're less likely to be surprised when things don't go the way we hoped and the way we planned. I was out for dinner the other night with Ed, and I just felt glad to get home after it was over. It didn't have anything to do with where we ate, what we ate, the neighborhood we ate in. I just sometimes can sense the weight of darkness when I'm out in the world. Do you ever feel it? I want to be home. We lived in downtown Baltimore when we moved here in 1985. That's where we stayed the first 5 years. It was almost impossible to find babysitters because none of the people we knew from church or work felt good about sending their kids to our house in the city to babysit. They didn't think it was safe. On the other end of that spectrum, I got an email at work the other day. Here's what it said. Are safe places ruining an entire generation's ability to cope? It was an article on safe spaces that some colleges offer for students who are upset about any number of things. Now, I don't think the article was suggesting that we don't protect our students. Certainly, we've heard the statistics about rape and violence on college campuses. I think the point they were trying to make in the article was about overprotection to the point of creating an unrealistic expectation that this is a safe world. So much so that our kids aren't learning to deal with adversity, which no matter how hard you try to prevent it, it's going to happen. It'll happen. This week on my radio show, we asked the question, if you get invited to an event or party, is it rude to ask who else is coming? For the record, I thought it was rude. Should we take a show of hands? No. About half the people who answered said they liked knowing so that if there was someone coming who they didn't want to be around, they could decline the invitation. Why? Because confrontation doesn't feel safe. People didn't want to run into an ex or anybody else they might feel uncomfortable around, a former boss, anyone who they had a strained relationship with for any number of reasons. I think sometimes when you run into people that you wouldn't choose to spend time with, there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it. Maybe there's a conversation that you need to have. Maybe you need to resolve your feelings about someone. You know, you can't just be a hermit. But sometimes that's how we live. We want to just be safe. When Ed and others were talking about starting churchONE a few years ago, I was fearful. The idea did not feel safe to me personally for a variety of reasons, some of which have been realized, others not. But over the last year especially, I feel like God has been teaching me a lot. And I'm trying to let go of what makes me feel safe just a little more often, because sometimes you have to do that in order to get to the good stuff of life. To grow up, to learn what you're made of and who God has made you to be. And the realization that Jesus is the only one who can offer me the sanctuary I really long for. And regardless of what happens to me in this world, if I'm following him, he's got me. He's got me. Yeah. I was telling a friend the other day at lunch, it's why Jesus fell asleep in the boat during the storm. You remember the story maybe in Luke 8, verse 24? The disciples wake him up. The storm is raging. They're fearing for their lives. They're like, Jesus, what are you doing? You're sleeping. Jesus calms the water, but then he asks them about where their faith was. Now, yes, Jesus had the advantage of being perfect. I got it. But he knew within the fiber of his being that God was his sanctuary, wherever he was. And so he could sleep in the storm. If we are followers of Christ, it really doesn't matter what circumstances we find ourselves in, whether we like them or not. He has us. He redeems all of it eventually. He will fight our battles. It doesn't mean we don't do anything, that we walk around without thought, like we're in a fog. I'm saying that there's a reality we should be challenging ourselves with every day, good or bad. Whatever is happening, it's recyclable. God will redeem and reuse even the most difficult parts of our lives. I was on my cousin Keely's website last night after having a conversation with her mom, my aunt, earlier in the day. Many years ago, Keely was struck with severe depression, as she puts it. I went to bed for 2.5 years. She was living on the West Coast at the time, and I remember hearing about her situation in bits and pieces from my aunt, but that's about all. It has taken her many, many years to talk about this. And now, according to this website I was on last night, this is new, she's speaking at churches and telling her story. In fact, her oldest daughter even goes with her sometimes to talk about what it was like as a child living through that dark time with her mom. It was only that access to the sanctuary of a living God that she says gave her the strength to let go of the shame she felt, to actually talk about this in front of other people who might be struggling with the same thing. When I feel insecure at work, I think about this, that whatever happens, I'm his. Doesn't mean my anxiety instantly vanishes. It's about continuing to recognize that I live within his protection. I'm under his wing. Because I used to place a lot of importance on feeling safe. I can think back to times when being in small groups with people, as Christians are wont to do, and when the group was forming, we'd all try to figure out who would be a safe addition. Because naturally, we wanted to be in a group where we could be vulnerable and feel protected with the thoughts we shared. But the problem is, our humanity gets in the way, and none of us, are really safe. That doesn't mean small groups aren't important or that we shouldn't care who we confide in. My point is that sometimes I spend so much of our lives thinking about where and how, who we feel safe with, that we forget to consider the only one who offers us true sanctuary in our lives. You know, throughout history, there have been churches that were destroyed while providing sanctuary for those in hiding. Because someone talked. Someone was promised an advantage, maybe their own safety, if they would just give up a little information. Now, I hope this church represents a place of rest and peace and safety for anyone who walks through the doors. And I think it does, and I think it has. But if we think that we won't be touched by darkness and that we will never disappoint each other, we're mistaken. We're mistaken. So I want to end this morning my part, and then we're going to worship with a couple of songs, with a story. It's a true story about Fanny Crosby, a remarkable woman born in the early 1800s. So as a baby, she developed an eye infection, and under the care of an incompetent doctor, at 6 months was given a treatment that blinded her for life. A few months after she was born, her father died. Her mother was just 21 at the time and hired herself out as a maid to support the two of them. And Fanny's grandmother cared for her at home. She would read the Bible to her. She would explain it in terms that a child could understand, always emphasizing the importance of prayer. As she grew older, Fanny became depressed because she couldn't learn. I was going to say because her name was Fanny. No, sorry. Because she couldn't learn as other children. She started to notice that she was different. And her grandmother taught her how to pray to God for knowledge. You know, she was really teaching her that God was her sanctuary. That's what she was doing. Fanny memorized the first 4 books of the Old Testament before she was 10, many of the Psalms and all the Gospels. And as her spirit grew, she became to believe that she was no less loved and really no different than other children. At 8 years old, she wrote her first poem, one that later she would say became the motto of her life. Oh, what a happy child I am, although I cannot see. I am resolved that in this world contented I will be. How many blessings I enjoy that other people don't. So weep or sigh because I'm blind? I cannot, nor I won't. Fanny taught at the New York Institute for the Blind for 23 years after getting her own education there. She eventually married and left teaching, but was musically inclined, and so she began to put her poetry to music, and she created many hymns that you would probably recognize if you grew up in the church or are of a certain age, like To God Be the Glory, Jesus Keep Me Near the Cross, Rescue the Perishing, Blessed Assurance. In fact, she became the most prolific hymnist in history. She wrote over 8,000 of them, using as many as 200 different pen names given to her by the publisher she worked for. In 1868, Fanny became the first woman to speak publicly in the Senate chamber in Washington. She was invited to read one of her poems. Fanny lived to be 95 and certainly would never have claimed to be a perfect person. But I think she had a pretty developed understanding of what it was like to live life under the protection of Jesus in the sanctuary that only He can provide. Here's what she said about her blindness. It seemed intended by the blessed providence of God that I should be blind all my life, and I thank Him for the dispensation. If perfect earthly sight were offered me tomorrow, I would not accept it. I might not have sung hymns to the praise of God if I had been distracted by the beautiful and interesting things about me. If I had a choice, I would still choose to remain blind, for when I die, the first face I will ever see will be the face of my blessed Savior. Fanny Crosby came across my mind when I was studying for today's talk and thinking about sanctuary, because one of her hymns is called Safe in the Arms of Jesus. Safe in the arms of Jesus, sweetly my soul shall rest. Safe from corroding care, safe from the world's temptations, sin cannot harm me there. Free from the blight of sorrow, free from my doubts and fears. Only a few more trials, only a few more tears. Jesus, my heart's dear refuge, Jesus has died for me. Firm on the rock of ages, ever my trust shall be. As the worship team comes back up to close our service this morning, let me just say that it will be good someday, won't it, to be free from sorrow, to be free from temptations, doubts, fears. But today, we walk out into a world filled with a lot of pain. You heard what they said, right? Aramenta? Don't be afraid to move toward it. Get a pamphlet. Don't be afraid to have a difficult conversation, to give somebody a hug, to say, I'm sorry. Move toward it. Because you know what? If you're following Jesus, He's covering you. You don't have to be afraid. He's covering you. Sometimes we're trapped by our own insecurities and our own need to try and make everything safe in this world. But Jesus has said it hundreds of times in the Bible. Do not be afraid. John 14:27. He says, peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid. Because you're safe under his wing.